All right, so we are gonna do this schema design for Facebook. Um, so this one is a little different than doing it from scratch. And I do think the other exercises are good for this. And in fact, one of the assignments for today, and I'll probably for the Friday demo, I can build something as well. But one of these assignments is basically Grubhub, some sort of Blue Apron food ordering, Instagram. So these are a bit more open-ended, and then there's the 32 flavors exercise as well. This Facebook one gives us a lot. I'll go through the process from the top, and that's a great suggestion, John. But since you all did follow this guide and there is some recommendations here, I'll kind of walk through this a bit first, because I don't want to, build something totally different than what's recommended. So they give us here tables and columns. And I'll come back to this when I start implementing to talk about how to do this. And note, by the way, so I wrote out all this stuff and it's maybe too much, but if you boil it down, it's not too many steps. Identify the things, identify the relationships, the relationship types, what goes there, and now we can start thinking about our keys and stuff. And so here, we're doing the same thing. We've identified our entities. And in fact, let me just go ahead and start building. I might as well start building this while I'm talking about this. And we'll call this Facebook. Right, and let me move the chat over here. And in this database schema design, we talk about user accounts and user profiles and posts and comments and reaction types. And apologies. And in fact, I could even turn this into, there's a bit more of a formal way to do stories, but just to kind of give some examples of if we didn't have this stuff, how I could do all these things. A user should be able to create an account. A user should be able to make a user profile. A user should be able to make a post. A user should be able to comment on a post. And note that there's a lot of nouns and verbs here, and I'm trying to be really consistent with my verbs and nouns. And we already have entities, user, account, profile, post, and relationships. If I kind of scroll down here, there's also reaction types. And I think I'll save this one for last because this one can be a little more complex. And this is really the process that I'm sort of driving for. And I'll kind of, when we get to this, walk through this to talk about these kinds of relationships. But just kind of running with this, if we didn't even have this guide at all, just from starting to think about what I want people to be able to do, I've got a user, and can everyone see this okay? I've got a user profile. I'll call this just user accounts. I've got post. I've got comments. And again, I would, when I did a lot of this stuff in school, we did an awful lot of it on paper. My hope was this ERD tool takes some of the work of like drawing out of the way, but really it's a means to an end. A user, well, they create an account and I could put a different verb here. We could just put has if you want. And while technically in sort of the design process I laid out, we deal with the relationships later, and this is a good example of being practical. Like I know that I only want each user to have one profile, so this is a one-to-one. A user is going to make a post. And several groups had really good questions about, should I connect a post to a user profile or a user account? There are trade-offs with both. My preference is the user account because I think, well, a user might not have a profile, but a user is always going to have an account, and I don't want to have an orphaned post or comment. And I'm happy to chat a bit more about that later. But again, they're both legitimate design decisions that have trade-offs. Let's see here, and let's say this is where I think maybe the relationships get a little tricky, and I'm actually not totally certain what this looks like, but like a post can have comments. And again, I'm not trying to be super strict. I just want to get a sketch going. A user also can make comments. And we do have this loop here, and that can be a little funky with entity relationship diagrams. But again, my goal here is just to start thinking about this stuff at a high level. And now that I've mapped out really all my critical relationships, I can start thinking about what kinds of relationships these are. Well, a user can make multiple posts, but a post can only belong to one user. Similarly, a user can make multiple comments, but a comment can only belong to one user. A post can have multiple comments, but a comment can only belong to one post. And again, the tool you use to get here is less important than the process, I think. But now I've actually done a pretty significant amount of design work. And in fact, I could go ahead and start writing my SQL schema. And in fact, I think I will. And I'm just going to start creating some tables based on all of this. I'm going to make everything lowercase for my own sanity. And I'm going to give everything a primary key because I like that. And again, because it's simple and consistent. Some people were experimenting with composite keys for certain tables, and that's totally useful, but you don't necessarily have to. Note that I have also chosen to ignore one of the more complicated parts of this task, namely the reactions, right? Which is where, as this guide mentions, we end up with a many-to-many relationship and a join table as one, and I think a good approach, where we have to track multiple reactions to a post. And I'm basically deciding I'm not going to worry about that yet. That step is more complicated. I like to get my skeleton set up and get my skeleton working and add the pieces on. Sometimes I'll design everything up front, and some people like that, and you can do that as well. The most important thing, I think, is separating designing from implementing, from coding. And once you start coding, never leave your code in a bad state. Like one of my mentors was like, I get nervous if I go more than 5 minutes without running my code. And in fact, let me go ahead and put drop table if exists user account. Because I want to be able to run this a whole bunch of times as I'm like revising things. Oh, and I need to give this a different name, and we'll just call this user profile. So I'm going to make a bunch of empty tables probably in a minute, but you know, I might make a typo. I might forget some SQL syntax, but if I run my code, usually I'll find out if I made a mistake because I'll get an error message. So the sooner I do that and the quicker, the more feedback I get and the smaller my bugs are and the easier they are to fix. And in fact, I will just go ahead and do that right now. Oh, and so we will drop the Facebook database because must have been working on this at some point in the past. And now I can run my SQL file. Note that these notices I can actually ignore. This is good. Postgres is saying this table doesn't exist. I don't have to worry about dropping it if it exists. Cool. And did I? Oh, I created these on my database, which I didn't want to do. So let's drop these tables. This is like, we don't really ever use this, but this is sort of a default user database. So it's easier to log in with pSQL. So let's try this again. Create. In fact, I should just up here, drop database if exists, Facebook, create database, Facebook. The more you can do to make the computer do the work and like eliminate manual steps, and pretty much any manual step is a source of potential error, the better. You actually can use these pSQL commands in SQL files. I think I had said at one point that we can't, but I was wrong there. So now let's see if this works. So this looks good because these notices just tell me this stuff doesn't exist. I've created these tables. I've connected to my Facebook database. So now I'm good to go. In fact, what I'm going to do to go one step further is I'm just going to connect to the default Postgres database every time I run this script, because when I'm connected to the Facebook database, oh, well, I added it, but if I run it without it, it doesn't drop the database. So 6 of one, half of dozen of the other. I guess that doesn't really matter if I'm inside the Facebook database already. Anyways, I'm getting a little in the weeds there. But I'm creating a user account table, a user profile table. I know I need a post table and a comment table. And I'm going to make these plural because I am a little obsessive about names and consistency. And I'm used to table names being plural. So I forget if that's convention or not. So not posts, but comments. I'm going to create the comments table. So I've got user accounts, user profiles, posts, and I've done this a lot, so I usually catch my typos quickly, but you all can see how doing this manual work, there are lots of opportunities to make mistakes. So that's yet another reason why, like, if I just ran my code after each one of these instead of all 5, I make my life a lot easier. If I had, like, say, forgotten this, and 30 minutes later, I'm expecting this to work, but it's not dropping the table, that could suck up like an hour until I realize what's going on. And now I have a bunch of tables and I have a skeleton, and they don't even have anything yet. But all this code works, and I know where I'm going. For me, this diagram is useful. You may want to take that next step of using draw SQL, if that helps, or using a spreadsheet. To be honest, I think the spreadsheet is actually a really good design tool, as we discovered. So that piece is really up to you. But I am following our process here. I've got entities, I've got relationships, I've got relationship types. I described my stories. I haven't done this stuff with, like, the attributes and everything. I'm sort of deciding, I'm chunking this up, right? I'm like, I can do all this, and then I can run with it and actually build that SQL and then come back to the rest. So I'm actually turning my entities into tables, and now we're about to add some relationships. And then I should probably create some fake data, and then I can start worrying about attributes and stuff. So our next step here is going to be some foreign keys. Our user profile connects to the users table. So I'm going to do user account ID, integer. And you could put this on the user accounts table if you want. There's probably one that's better or recommended, but that is not critical, and I can always change that later. So I'm not. No, we do probably want it here because it will make certain kind of joins better. But again, not worth getting too hung up on at this point in the game. And I need to use the correct syntax, which I believe is like this. And in a similar vein, I've decided that the posts is going to connect to the user account ID, and comments will too. And I do need to add commas. And again, this is why, like, if I were you, I'm adding this to like 5 tables at once. I would like add it to 1 and run this again. The more you can do to get a really quick feedback loop of constantly running code, the easier life starts to get. So now I'm doing pretty good. And actually, I think before connecting posts and comments, I just want to create some fake data. I'm going to try and practice what I preach here. And this is good because I'm realizing my user account has nothing, and that'll work, but it's a little confusing. I'm going to add an email. Let's make it a varchar. Let's make it unique. Let's make it not null. And I think I'll just update this with an attribute. And again, we don't have to go over the top with this. I might as well add the ID attribute. And the tool is really up to you. And you can see I'm not like being super strict with this process, but I did write this down with the idea, like, I think doing it all the way through once or twice is actually really useful, because once you get used to it, then it's easier to sort of take the bits that you find useful. And this is also why creating fake data early helps, because it helps us flesh out our data model. Because now I can just do this, and I'm just going to do alice@gmail.com. And I think what I'll do is I'll put this right here. So, I know on day one, I had sort of set stuff up where we have all these separate tables, and that honestly may have been more trouble than it was worth. I apologize about that. There are other times when that's nice, because if I just want to work on one table, it's nice to be able to run an SQL file to just drop and rebuild that table. And again, I can run my code again. I do have an error. I see drop cascade. I see a hint. I see an error on line 4. Let's see what's going on here. I see user account and user accounts. That already.
It won't
Yeah.
drop a table if one of the other tables relies on it. So you
Oh,
have a foreign key in one of the tables down below.
It would
yeah.
have to cascade.
Oh, yeah. And actually, where would I put that cascade statement in the drop table if exists?
Yes, right there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great call. We haven't talked a lot about cascade. And since Postgres wants to keep our data integrity, and it's not going to delete a user account if a post depends on it, that's good. But when I'm designing, it's kind of a pain. And Cascade says, Postgres, I actually do want you to delete all the things. And in fact, the fact that I see user account and user accounts already freaks me out a little bit. And I'm going to go one step further here. And I am going to add to the top of this connect to Postgres, because I want to make sure I'm dropping this whole Facebook database. I don't like that my stuff has already gotten a little disorganized. So let's see here. Let's clear the buffer and run this one more time. And I do have a syntax error on line 12, and it is a trailing comma. So, it's up, there's a whole lot of information here, and I know all these notices and errors can maybe, especially when you're doing this stuff for the first time, be more confusing than they're worth. So you may want to take the approach that's best for you, but I'm a little more used to it. And my goal is I really want to get useful information as quickly as I can. So for me, I can find, all right, I have this error. I know this is a real error. It's coming from line 12 in my SQL file. Well, that's just the parentheses. What's happening the line before that? I have a trailing comma. Let me also see if I have any other trailing commas, since that's such an easy mistake to make. And let's run this again. And again, and this is great. And in fact, I'll clear the buffer and run this again. And now I can just see really nicely all of my messages, all of my notices are expected. No errors I'm not expecting. I've got like 99% certainty. Everything is good. If I hadn't run this and I wrote a ton more code and then ran it, and I've got like 50 more lines of code and I'm trying to find this trailing comma, that's a huge pain. So again, run your code a lot in small steps, and the bugs become smaller and life becomes better. And in fact, I'm going to just, I think I'm just going to do select star from user accounts. I just want to see that right away. Why not? Since I'm always doing this stuff manually anyway. So I've got a user, which is great. Let's create a profile. I'm going to do the same thing I did a minute ago. I'm just going to add the select statement. So now, with one command, I delete everything. So even if I have some mistake, I'm going to blow it away. My SQL file is my source of truth. And I get print statements essentially confirming for me that everything is what I expect. My data is correct, it's in there, and everything looks good. And I've gotten pretty far now because I have user accounts and profiles, and I've got a foreign key relationship set up, and I've got an ID. And we're about to connect posts and comments. I have written those foreign keys, but I haven't tested it, right? I'm not writing a test file, but this print statement does the same job. It functions as a test. And because I'm using a tiny amount of ridiculously simple sample fake data, all of this is dramatically simpler. And as I said, I'm a little obsessive about this stuff. I'm very visual, so I like to get rid of all the other messages that are old so I don't get confused. And now I know everything here is current and from this run, and everything is exactly as it should be. And, you know, hopefully this is almost starting to become a little repetitive and boring, right? Because I'm doing the exact same process for each table, for each step. I'm trying to name everything the same way. I just want as much consistency and clarity as possible. And I'm going to make a note here to do foreign key to post, because the comment had to connect to a post. And I know I have to do that next. And I was just remembering that now, and I'm not going to do it yet because I want to run this and make sure it works. And in fact, the post needs stuff. I think my entities, we need, like, the comment needs to have text and stuff so I can really make sure everything works, but we're already getting pretty far. So already I think made pretty decent progress here. And so before I kind of continue to the next step, I just kind of want to check in and see what questions people have, if there are things that they would like me to review or go over. And are folks finding this useful?
Yes, I think it's helpful.
Sorry, go ahead, Anna.
I was just saying, I think it's helpful.
Awesome. Glad to hear. Yeah, and just so you all know, this, I did not program this way overnight. I got a lot of feedback and advice from mentors and peers and team leads over the years. And I took a lot of deliberate time and practice. And still, when I'm doing real work, it's easy to slip into knocking out a bunch of code and not kind of like being really systematic. You know, because this is a much smaller task for me, it's a lot easier to follow this process, but this is definitely a habit that takes time to develop. But this is sort of what I was taught by other people and what I found really helps me to be productive. And really the goal here is less work, right? I write less code and I run it. If there's a bug, I don't have to look in 50 lines, I only have to look in 2 lines. And the bigger our projects get, the more valuable this kind of workflow habit becomes. So now we're at a pretty good point. I think because I have these relationships in the diagram, I want to add this foreign key just to close that loop. Well, it's really time for us to start adding attributes, right? Our comments have nothing, our posts have nothing. So that's really our next step here. It is easy to forget things like adding a comma working this way. I think that is one of the challenges, is it's easy to introduce syntax errors, but that's also why just running your code literally after every line that you add is really useful. And by the way, there's a hotkey on a Mac, it's Control tilde to focus on the VS Code terminal. But the bane of my existence is in VS Code. I wanted to jump focus, so I can just use a hotkey, but it hides and shows it. And I'm sure there's a fix and I just haven't found it. So post ID. And actually, someone had made a really good point earlier. Should we name this user account ID column differently on the comments table? Because it might be unclear which user this is, the user that posted or the user that commented. I'm just going to leave it like this for now because I know it's the user that commented and my naming system is consistent. So for me, that's what makes sense right now. And I'm not worrying about constraints that much right now, you'll notice. I added like a little bit in. I mean, and to be honest with the foreign key, there's not a lot of additional constraints we need yet. But yeah. So now I'm going to run this. And I should have gotten an error because here's my post. Right. The one thing actually that's a little bit of a bummer of all my print statements is it doesn't quite say which table it is, though this notice does kind of help me. Here are my comments, excuse me. And there's no post ID because I didn't insert that data. Yeah, what's up?
Your select statement underneath the comments table still says posts.
Oh, thank you so much. That is an excellent point. Which raises a really good point of, there's no error message that's going to tell me about that. Just like if I write a test, we can't test the tests. So there's always sort of this one process. So this is better. Thank you so much, Anna. I totally would have missed that. I've decided now that I look at this, I don't like this. I do want to make sure that there's always a post, and that there's always a user, like post ID can be null here. So I think I am going to add some constraints to these foreign keys. I know I have not really updated this in the entity relationship diagram. And again, sort of like your design process can be different. I'm not following this step by step, but I am kind of following each of these steps, and I'm kind of trying to like let each thing naturally evolve from the next. And the reason I want to do this is because it's going to be easy for me to forget that for a comment, it needs a post ID. And if I forget and I'm expecting it later and I get confused, that could suck up like 40 minutes of my life. But if I make the computer do the work and add a constraint, it will make my life easier and make it impossible for me to make that mistake. So not null. And now I get null value in column post ID, which is exactly what I want, because now it is impossible for me to make that mistake of creating a comment that is not connected to a post. our job is not to really know all this stuff, but it's to make the computer do the work. I mean, we do need to know all this stuff, but we're human. None of us can be perfect all the time. We're not meant to think like computers. We want to make the machines do the work. I'm going to add this not null constraint everywhere because while I didn't do it, I could have created a user account, comment not connected to a user account. I have this same issue everywhere, so I'm just going to add this not null constraint everywhere, and let me run this to make sure I don't have any problems. I think everything is looking good. Not null. And I think those are all of my not null constraints. So I think we're in a good spot. The user account ID, as long as I'm doing this, I'm basically getting into one-to-one versus one-to-many relationships now. I don't want to have a user account with multiple profiles. That's a design decision I'm making. So this also needs to be unique. I don't want two user profiles that point to the same account. A post, that's fine, right? A post could point to the user account a whole bunch of times because I, as a user, can make as many posts as I want. And so I'm going to update my stories a bit. And I have a lot of practice at this, but the more you do this process, the more it helps you and the more you start to think about this. Right. And so, you know, if I'm really designing from scratch, like spending time really digging into just writing out these descriptions is actually pretty high value because then I can start turning that into entities and relationships and tables and foreign keys and columns and stuff. So we've got posts, we've got comments, we've got a user account ID, we've got a post ID. User is able to make multiple comments on the same post. So that seems okay. I'm not sure if I need any other constraints here, and I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. It's coming up, it's about 10 to 3. So I should pause in a little bit, but I do want to add a couple more attributes, and then I'll kind of see what people want to see, and maybe we'll break, or maybe we'll look at like adding reactions, because that would be the other interesting thing. But I've gone pretty far here, and I only have one user. I really haven't done much here. And to be honest, I don't need much more than one user to test this stuff out. You know, what I could do actually, that's probably a good idea, is let's do a query with a join to connect everything. And note how simple this stuff starts to get now that we already have created these tables and foreign keys and tested them out, and all the names are really consistent. And posts should be plural. So fingers crossed this works. I might as well join on the comments. Dealing with queries with comments, if there were a lot of comments, that might get a little more complex, or there'd be more data or whatever, but I only have one comment. I just might as well test all of this out as long as we're doing all of this. So here, the comment does have an ID, and this is a source of confusion, right? Like maybe I should name it like this, but I'm not going to worry about this too much right now. I'm going to add a note for myself so I don't forget this, because I did almost just forget this right now. Like in my mind, I was like, oh, this is the user that posted it. And I was like, wait a minute. No, it's not. And I don't think I need. No, I think just that a little easier. And I think I'll just put a space right there just to emphasize that for me. So I could join by user account. Well, no, I can't. In fact, and that was the whole point, is that we need the post ID equals the comments. And in fact, I'm going to add a comment here too. Remember, comments user account ID is not poster. It's comment here. So we want to join by post comments ID, not user account. And if this was production code, I probably wouldn't put this here because someone else on the team would probably say that's obvious and we should have a test for it. I kind of like comments and they help me remember stuff. So I tend to add a lot of comments. So I do have an error here, which is good because I only have my one query to debug. And it looks like it's coming from, so this is good news. If I'm reading this, column user accounts, user account ID does not exist. That's good news because I probably just have a typo. And it's coming from line 50. Let's see here. Join user profiles. And that would, let's see, on user accounts, user account. Let's
Wouldn't
see.
the second part say user profiles?
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Megan. I was totally blanking there. And raises a good point. We could put this on the left side of the equal statement, and maybe that would make it easier for me to read and make that connection. So that could be a good habit to do. Right. That's sort of what I tend to do when I make like programmer errors. I'm like, well, is there something I can change in my process to make that error less likely? And it may or may not for in this case, but it's good to think about. Yeah, so thank you again, because I think I would have gone down a wrong path there in fixing that. But again, the good news is I just have one little query to fix. And now I've got another error. Let's see what it says. A syntax error, which is a good sign because it's maybe less, and it's join comments on post ID. And let's see what's going on here. This would probably be the problem. That should just be posts.id. There may be another problem. So there is one more problem. Let's see here.
Is it the semicolon on line 50?
Yeah, thank you so much. Perfect. I had two semicolons. Awesome. And now I've got a query. I've got one massive join, right? This is test-driven development, even though we're not totally following the process, formally speaking. Another term is interactive development. So this is great. So now let's just add a couple things here just to make this useful. I'm just going to add name. So I want to keep it simple. I'm just going to add an attribute and we'll just call it we'll just call it message. We could do title and body. Again, I'm gonna start really, really simple. And you know, a post probably needs a title. So I added a bunch of things, and I'm breaking my own rule here. I should have added the name and updated the code and run it. So I can at least do it this way when I'm implementing here. Let's just add name, varchar, not null. And that's all I'm going to do. And let's go ahead and run this. So interestingly, I think my select statement actually is not working because I'm getting nothing, which tells me my join is maybe screwed up. Insert has more expressions than target columns. Okay, so this is good news. I need to just add the name over here. And again, I'm making mistakes left and right, but because I have a process I consistently follow and I know how to get good data from my error messages, and I only make really tiny changes, it's way easier for me to fix my mistakes. And now I see Alice at Gmail and I see her name Alice. So now we're cooking. So let's tackle the post next. Title, varchar, not null. I don't think the title needs to be unique. Message, varchar, not null. And that's a design decision. Maybe we want to have an empty title. Maybe we want an empty message. Maybe not. And again, I'm just keeping everything as simple as I possibly can. And look at that. I've got a trailing comma. Let's see if there are other errors. So there we go. So yeah, there were a whole ton of error messages. Again, sometimes you basically have to know, you look at the bottom of the list of errors or the top, and that's usually what will point you to the next. But again, I only added 3 lines of code there, so it was so easy for me to see, hey, I added a trailing comma. And now let's tackle comments. And let's not add a trailing comma. And I've got the same name here, message. I'm just going to be consistent in my names. A comment should have a date and all that, but those are things we can add later. And I should have gotten an error, and I did. Null value in column message violates not null constraint because I have yet to add message in my data. And this is also why creating really simple fake data right off the bat is really helpful. And I'm going to make this message different, so when I look at that SQL query, I can more easily see what's what. I've got hello world, I've got goodbye world, I've got Alice's name and email. So we have a pretty decent data model here. And I didn't follow the steps. And they have different things. They call this content. They didn't include a title. I added a title. I'm skipping all this stuff. This stuff becomes dramatically easier to add once everything else is working. Same with these, dramatically easier to add once you have the skeleton and the big important pieces working. And every single bit of code I have works. And a lot of these questions I already kind of tackled along the way. So again, I didn't follow the design process in exact order, but I was sort of following it, and I would move back and forth based on sort of like the workflow that works best for me. So we've built out a pretty good amount of stuff here. We're basically done, I think, except for adding like reactions to posts. But it's also 3 o'clock. So let me check in and see what questions do people have? What would people like to see me do? Are there any bits of this that would be useful to walk through again, or like add a new column to a table, or anything like that, or maybe like design questions? And do people want to, should I add reactions and likes and stuff?
I think I'd be interested in seeing, the join table and then maybe some of the constraints that we'd put in here.
Yeah, totally. The join table, and that's a good point about the constraints. And let me take a quick look at the constraints that are listed in the assignment. Because if there's ones that I missed, we can add them in and see what they look like. We've got user accounts and user profiles. This one we should have with a foreign key and unique constraint for user ID and user profiles. I tackled this one earlier. User account ID integer has to be unique and not null. And this is the other advantage, I think, of building in small chunks and running code as you go and using sample data. It's a lot easier to kind of design organically, right? So I was like, I want to make my life easier. So let's add these constraints. User accounts and posts. Can a user create more than one post? Can a post be created by more than one user? Oh, well, that's a good one. Let's see if I missed something here for that one-to-many constraint for the post. So for user account ID, it's a foreign key. It's not null. A user can create as many posts as we want. So that part is set. Can a post be created by more than one user? Well, each post only has one user account ID, so no. So I think that one is sort of taken care of without us having to do much work there. And if I'm getting any of this wrong, please let me know, because it's totally possible, that I'm just skipping over something or having a brain freeze. And now we have posts and reactions, and this is the next bit to implement. And this is a many-to-many relationship where we'll use a join table. And I think it's time to update our data model. Post has a reaction, and let's add a relationship. We'll put the reaction over here. And this is a post, and this is a reaction. So am I correct in thinking that the assignment had reaction types? Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And if I'm kind of adding attributes here, we'll have type. So, there are a couple ways to design this, and I'm sort of skipping the design process here. This is probably the trickiest bit, and it would take the longest. And it should, because there's a lot of different possible approaches, and it's appropriate to spend some upfront time on this. And spending that time in the design process saves us work and bugs later on. So for this one, I am sort of, we are sort of skipping this a bit. That reaction type we know has an ID, and we'll just call it, I don't know, I'll just call it the message. Someone was adding like emoji, like, we could have like emoji URL. We'll just give it a name. And I will say the name probably needs to be unique. The emoji URL probably needs to be unique. The ID is obviously unique. And what is the relationship between a reaction and a reaction type? The verb is less important, but a reaction is or belongs to, I'm just going to say is, reaction type. And each reaction can only be one reaction type. And I have this backwards. So to kind of update my stories, a user can add many reactions to multiple comments made by them or other users. We could even add reactions to posts if we wanted. And so if we break this down, this is really, I think, probably the best step one of the design process. Again, your mileage may vary. I think everyone has preferences, but this is often a good way to get started and kind of use it to drive this. For me, the visual approach helps a bit more. So I have all this stuff right here, and I also need to connect my reaction type to my user. The user does a lot of stuff. And there's probably, and this should not be reaction types, it should in fact be reaction. And there's probably better verbs to be had here than like makes, and makes. But I'm not going to worry about that too much. So this can feel like an awful lot. And again, you know, drawing this on paper, doing this more informally is totally fine. I think the point is to have a design process where you're not thinking about tables and columns and the implementation details. Let's follow the same process of, I've mapped this out. Let's create our entity. We'll add the relationships. We'll add the attributes. We'll create the table. We'll add the foreign keys. We'll make some data. Then we'll add the attributes. Drop table if exists. So we have a whole bunch of things here. I'm going to start with a reaction. I'm going to cheat a little bit because we know this is going to become a join table. I think I'll just do it this way, actually, and we can watch how this evolves. Because this, I think, I'm being a little artificial, but we can kind of watch what a more organic design process might look like. A reaction is really simple. It's got an ID, it's got a message. Let me expand my terminal a bit. Let me clear this buffer. This is really simple. This does not do everything we need, but it works and it's simple. Now, let's connect this to a post. I connected it to a post. I haven't updated this. I haven't added a constraint. I haven't used it here. I'm not getting any data on this. Well, I don't want this to be null. Now I get an error. This is good. I'm getting data. I need to update my insert statement. And this is good because this is like a test. And now it's impossible for me to make this mistake again, because the data schema that I've designed will not allow it. I can see that this is working, which is awesome. Let's update our select statement. And actually, I screwed up here because a reaction belongs to a comment and not a, well, I assigned it to a post, which I think is what the problem is. Is that correct, that we want reactions to be for posts? What do you all want, posts or comments?
I would think probably posts.
Say that
Probably
again.
post.
Posts, yeah. I think my mistake was over here where I said reactions are for comments, so I'm going to change that to posts. And again, I'm a little obsessive about consistency because it makes life easier. Okay, so this is good actually. So we're actually set. So I actually thought I made a mistake but didn't, which is even better. And let's see now if my mega query gives me what I want. And there we go. Great idea. So do I have a join table? Do I have many-to-many relationships? No, but I have something that works. And that's sensible and easy to read, and I can iterate on it. So now, so this is actually what I really did here was I broke this story into two features. And I'm sure all of you can think of websites you've been on where you actually see this in action, where it's like, I can only add one emoji to a comment or something along those lines. And this is a lot of where this comes from, and this whole sort of agile style of development and just breaking stuff into smaller steps. Because step one is shippable. If we had to launch a product tomorrow, being able to do one emoji reaction is better than none. And we've accomplished that. And in a perfect world where everyone had a million years to write tests, there would be a test for that and we would all pass it. And then there would be another test for, say, like multiple reactions. So now I do need to refactor, because there's no way there's no way to do it this way. We can try to use Postgres arrays. I could do like Postgres array of reactions, but that's not what we want to do. We want to use this join table pattern, which is usually what you want to do for many-to-many relationships. Pizza toppings accepted. Though here it is interesting to think about, do we really want or need like 10 rows in a table if for every single reaction? And maybe that's not so bad. I mean, it's tiny amounts of data. It's not even text. It's like integers and binary. It might not be so bad. And this is where this stuff starts to be useful. Because I've done this before, I can refactor this a bit more easily. I'm leaving my old table name here. There's a whole system called like migrations that you can do for like refactoring stuff, but I want to dump the reactions table, and I'm going to rename this to, let's have it be posts. Yeah, posts reactions. And now I guess actually I apologize. Stepping back, I kind of jumped the gun. I was totally wrong, guys. And hopefully some of you all were thinking this, but we totally can have multiple reactions to a single post with this, right? There's nothing stopping me from, you know, doing this. And in fact, let me go ahead and test this out rather than talk about it. I think this should work just fine. Yeah, I apologize, everyone. I totally was leading us down a wrong path there, and I hope that some of you were kind of like, wait a minute. I just got so zeroed in on something. We don't have a unique constraint here. So we can add multiple reactions just fine this way. So this works great. So what I apologize, I'm not really doing this. We actually had this sort of taken care of off the bat. What I am doing is I'm ignoring reaction types. And I'm just getting reactions working. Just to get this message with these values, you know, great idea. I disagree. We could even, like, for a little consistency in planning ahead in the prototyping phase. Right, and now, does this meaningfully change anything? No, but the different name here and the different data indicates a different intent and helps us sort of look a little ahead with our designing. And it looks like this is the risk of refactoring, is it's easy to forget stuff. And now I've got reactions, and it's not perfect, but it's working. And now I do want to rename this table to follow the convention of join. Well, I guess we're not there yet because we haven't made reaction types. So let me pause here before I move on to see if folks have any questions. And now I'll add reaction types and we'll see our join table come into being.
I think I was just wondering, I kind of thought that of the join table as like a link between two tables. So like the post reactions would be linking like the reactions table and the post table. Is that not really the case? Like, are we going to get rid of the reactions table completely and replace it?
That is the case, and you are correct. And over here in this diagram, what I haven't done is create a reaction types table.
Okay.
So we don't need that join yet. But we will once we add reaction types.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. And I got a little confused there and and was describing a little bit of a wrong path too. So I sort of contributed to that. And we probably will want to rename this. And you know, when you're designing and building, you might want to just jump ahead and sort of not do this intermediate step. But I wanted to do this intermediate step to show that you can, and that it's actually not the worst thing because we have something working. We have reactions and you can post a bunch. And no, we don't have reaction types. And yes, I'll have to refactor this, but this code works. So again, it's a little bit of your own choice about workflow, but this sort of like do one really simple little thing and slowly build it up has some benefits. And here for reactions, we really need, I got a little confused, so I started adding more data. So, and in fact, what I think I can do is just, so I don't have stuff to change when I refactor it later. It's something like that. Just use one insert statement. And that does not like it because I have values here as well. But again, I'm a little obsessed with really trying to keep my code clean and organized as I go and run it all the time. And it makes life a lot easier. Because just a minute ago, I had an error here and I had to make 2 changes to fix it. And now when I refactor this reactions table, I'll just have 1 change on the insert statement for that part. So now we do want to add reaction types. That's definitely our next task. Because we want the users to be able to use emojis, and those have URLs, and we need to add all these other things, and I don't want to have tons of duplicate data. So it's time. And we want to see what a join table looks like. And I'll just leave type as varchar. I'm going to make this not null. I'm going to make it unique. I don't want reactions. Each reaction really should be unique. I'm going to rename this the type for consistency. And I'm not going to worry about the emoji URL. And I'm going to implement that later because I don't need to implement it to get my relationships and all the pieces working. And I'm going to make my life simple and be consistent. And because I had this issue before where I really wanted to have more than one kind of reaction, I'm going to do that here too. And I should add my select. And lo and behold, I've got my reaction types. Now I run into my issue, which is I want to use reaction types. And so for reactions, now really this needs to become reaction type ID integer references reaction types ID. And I should rename this table to indicate that it's now really a join table between these 2 things. Right. And now I can have multiple posts and reaction types together. So I'll just do that right now before I forget. And to keep everything consistent. And now I should get an error because this data is bad. I'm going to run this expecting that. And I indeed do have these errors. So let's change this to post ID and reaction type ID. And now I'm going to run this and I think I'm going to get another error. And can anyone maybe predict what error I might get when I run my SQL file now? And it's going to come from this insert statement.
Well, isn't the well, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but isn't the post ID supposed to have a unique ID?
That is a good question, and the answer is no. We have a foreign key reference here that says this post ID has to refer to a post that actually exists, and it can't be null, but we haven't added a unique constraint. And I was forgetting this morning as well. Foreign keys by default don't have a unique constraint. So remember, like, we sort of followed the same pattern for, I think it was enrolling multiple students in a class from the students table. I would need to explicitly add a unique constraint. And this is okay because I want to have multiple reactions on the same post. So this is desired, and by default, a foreign key does not enforce uniqueness, which I think is a common gotcha. So that's a good question. So the error I think I'm going to get is, I'm not 100%, but I think what will happen is this reaction type ID 1 and 2, the foreign key ID, I think it enforces that it must be there, and these don't exist yet. So let's see if I'm right. So I'm getting two errors, in fact. The first one is I create this table post reactions, but it references the key on this other table, reaction types. And Postgres does execute this SQL top to bottom sequentially. So we are creating this table before this exists. So that one is a relatively easy fix, but that's a good thing to be aware of as you build your schema up, and to keep an eye out for that kind of error message. And that solves the other issue that I think we were going to run into, which is, I'm not sure if this data exists yet, but now it does. And in fact, we've got smiley and frowny, and now we have a post with two different reactions. And what I am going to add is not null for our reaction type, because if there's going to be a reaction, there should always be a reaction type. And it looks like I'm getting an error for my join, and it looks like because I'm using the old name for the reactions table. So now we have this one big query. The one thing I haven't added here is reaction types. So let's do that. And yes, this is a lot of code, but once I start making my names really, really consistent, and I follow the same pattern for stuff, it becomes a lot easier to read and understand and write it. Let's see if that works. So I see the smiley and frowny. No, I'm getting like multiple duplicate results because this join means for each of these reactions, I'm getting a whole row. All this other stuff is the same, except for the reaction. And this is the design trade-off in having like each reaction using a join table, because now there's a row for each reaction, even though there's just like one post and one comment. And that covers most of our territory. And note that my table names don't have to correspond. That's kind of, I think, a plus of an entity relationship diagram. I'm not worried about table names here, though I do want some consistency. Like, I'm just going to leave this as reaction because it captures the idea, the concept, the intent. This is the conceptual data model on the left, and this is our logical data model on the right. And I think we have pretty much everything. Now, at this point, I think it really just would be sort of adding more data or making some queries. And actually, what I do want to do before I forget is commit this to our demos and notes repo. What questions do people have, and what bits would be useful for me to go over and review? How are people feeling about join tables? Pretty good. Like you want to get it under your fingers a couple times, but this has helped a bit. Confused. Awesome.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's definitely helped for me. I think that, yeah, I feel like I need practice like writing queries with join tables, but this definitely helped like explain how to build them more.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Yeah, the join tables, maybe and after this we should break so I can tackle a couple things and you all can do some stuff for stand, but to kind of use this schema. So what we didn't do this morning is kind of construct what the query looks like. And remember that our join table here is course students that joins the students in the course. So let me go ahead and construct this right now, because I think especially with these colors, there will be some nice visualization. And I can move the columns around in a minute, but just to get the ball rolling, I'm just going to do a little bit of copying and pasting. Oop, I don't need to copy and paste one up. And note that these courses don't exist. Actually, so let's do like select star from courses, join on course, sorry, join course students on courses ID equals course students course ID. And let me go ahead actually and break these onto separate lines as well. And let's see this in action. This stuff goes away, right? That's our first join. And I'm not, if it's okay with everyone, I'm not and you all can see my screen right now with the spreadsheet, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. I wish there was a way just to draw directly on Google Sheets. I'm not like showing the join. Maybe what I can do here is I can at least put those in bold. Excuse me. We can figure out a better way to visualize this later, but this is a good starting point. Because I don't want to, I'll just start messing stuff up if I start chopping things around. But here's what we join on. Or actually I can just put that there. And we'll put that there. We'll put that there. And now actually we can actually do a pretty nice. Right. That's our first join. Now for students. That's our second join. So let me do my little copy and paste dance here. And note that the ID of this join table, we don't need it for the join itself. It becomes useful for other things. Like if I want to list all the classes that I'm enrolled in, having that ID is very nice because if you think about building a web page, it lists all my courses. I click on a link to see how am I doing in algebra or who's my teacher. Well, you all have made those API calls with like Rick and Morty names or Pokemon names. This ID for this course students join table is probably the query param we'd pass in an API call to start getting more information. And then the database would like call this and get the other IDs and do all that work on the back end and format it and send it to us. And now with our students, let's go ahead and put this here. And in fact, these students are not enrolled, and Zach is enrolled in 2 classes. And again, here is our second join, and I will use maybe like that. Yeah, just to try and differentiate. No, I'll just make it consistent. More or less consistent. It's actually kind of cool with both of these on there. Here's our second join. And does this sort of help illustrate a bit what's happening with this course students join table? And the same thing is happening with posts reactions. It's called a join table because it literally sits in the middle and then it gets used in these joins. So hopefully that helps illustrate the join a bit more. And it can take practice. And I think honestly the best thing to do is, you know, I built this query up one join at a time. And I think that's a great way to do it. And that's also an advantage of running your code as you go. And like, I didn't wait till I wrote everything to create my mock data. I did it right away. And if you kind of build the whole thing out one step at a time, it feels slower, but you move faster because you can do all of these really nice things. And like, if I didn't do that, I couldn't build up this query one step at a time. And I think that's by far the best way to get comfortable with using joins and queries is build up a big query one join at a time and run it each time. What other questions do folks have or things that you'd maybe like to see or review again before we wrap? Okay, awesome. Let me quickly comment on the assignments we have. That's awesome that we tackled the one from this constraints and relationships. what I would probably recommend is it's up to you. The next stage of this 32 flavors, this is a join table. Employees work at multiple stores, but because this is more open-ended, this is going to be more work and be harder. So probably don't start here. This schema design challenge, I think, can be a pretty good one because it's going to use everything that we saw. It's not really going to introduce anything new. And what you'll discover very quickly is that the patterns for these things are really similar. Instagram, you guys, I think this was an assignment a little earlier. This is pretty much the same as Facebook. We're not even dealing with like user account and user profile. You can build out more if you want, but again, in the spirit of starting simple, this is plenty. You'll find very quickly ordering from Grubhub has a lot of similarities to this, and we've sort of seen this with the pizza delivery in 32 flavors. And I think, again, starting and building like very simple with these things, you can move forward. And then this Blue Apron is a little more complex because it's this sort of subscription service, but service plans are not unlike user profiles, just as an example. If this feels like a little too open-ended, then what I would recommend is I had this lined up as either sort of part 2 of our lesson or like a tutorial we worked through together. This is a walkthrough of designing a data schema for a grocery store, which, by the way, is again going to be really similar to these. However, you have to actually write this code and run it and use this to learn. Like you should like try creating each table one at a time. Don't just copy this whole thing in and run it, because that's not going to help you learn it. Like create one table, create some fake data. You know what I mean? Like use this guide, but use it to help practice designing and doing this stuff. So that would sort of be my recommendation. If you feel like, hey, I want more practice with how to design, I'm not quite sure I can effectively tackle these more open-ended things, dive into this. Code it out. These advanced queries are nice, but you can honestly ignore them. These, I should remove these, but these actually are in our other assignment, so I'll remove these. And this actually is our Friday review. If you're feeling good about that, or you burn through that, tackle some of these somewhat more guided, but more open-ended schema design tasks. And then if you feel good about that, I would say dive into 32 flavors. This schema modifications assignment from today, this is a good one to practice. It gives you an existing database, but it focuses on sort of like using this altered table statement, and kind of doing this thing with migrations. And honestly, this one is probably less critical. You could go about this too by just making a big init SQL and modifying it with the same process that I did. But I would probably put this SQL schema modifications assignment last on my list. But I do think you, like everyone, we've got an hour before stand down. Take a break and dive into one of these assignments, because you will want to get a little bit of hands-on time in on this today. So let me go ahead